The Omega, who refused to break the silver chains burned against Sarah Winter's wrists, but she wouldn't give Alpha King Dominic Blackthorne the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. 300 years his pack had ruled the northern territories with iron and ice. 300 years of Omegas bowing, scraping, begging for mercy from wolves who had forgotten what it meant to feel. And now Sarah stood in his throne room, not as a supplicant, but as a prisoner accused of the one crime no Omega could survive, poisoning an Alpha's bloodline. Look at me when I'm speaking to you. Dominic's voice could have frozen summer itself. Sarah lifted her chin, meeting eyes that held all the warmth of a winter grave. The rumors hadn't lied. The Alpha King was devastating. Sharp jaw, broad shoulders, dark hair that fell just past his collar. But there was something profoundly wrong with him. Something missing. In 2 decades of rule, no one had ever seen him smile, never seen him rage, never seen him feel. "I didn't poison anyone," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Your nephew died because someone wanted you to think I did." A muscle twitched in his jaw. The only sign he'd heard her at all. Sarah Winters, 23, orphaned at 12, raised by the Riverside Pack until you were sold to my brother's household as a servant. He circled her slowly, a predator assessing prey. 5 witnesses place you in the kitchen before my nephew took ill. The healer found wolfsbane in his system. Wolfsbane you had access to for the garden work. Wolfsbane I would never use to harm a child. Sarah turned with him, refusing to give him her back. Your nephew was 7 years old. Why would I— Silence. The word cracked like a whip. I don't care about your reasons. I care about justice. Justice? The laugh escaped before she could stop it, sharp and bitter. You don't know the meaning of the word. The room went deathly quiet. Even the guards by the door seemed to stop breathing. No one spoke to the Alpha King that way, no one who wanted to keep their tongue. Dominic moved faster than her eyes could track, suddenly inches away, his hand gripping her jaw with controlled force. Up close, she could see the truth of what everyone whispered. His eyes were empty, beautiful, deadly, and completely devoid of anything resembling humanity. Choose your next words carefully, Omega, he said softly. They may be your last. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but she held his gaze. Then execute me. But know that when you do, you'll never find out who really killed your nephew, or why they want me to take the fall. Something flickered behind those dead eyes. Not emotion, not exactly, but something like interest. He released her jaw and stepped back. You have 3 days, he said. Prove your innocence or I'll carry out the execution myself. 3 days? That's generous beyond measure. He turned toward his throne, dismissing her with his indifference. And Sarah? You'll be confined to the palace, under my personal watch. If you run, I'll hunt you down and make your death slow enough to savor. As the guards dragged her toward the door, Sarah looked back once. The Alpha King sat on his throne like a statue carved from ice and fury, beautiful, terrible, and utterly alone. She had 3 days to save her life. What she didn't know was that in saving herself, she might be the only one who could save him. Will Sarah uncover the conspiracy before time runs out? Follow this journey of mystery, forbidden connection, and a king who forgot how to feel until one Omega made him remember. Like and subscribe for Chapter 2. Cracks in the Ice. The palace chambers they'd locked her in were gilded cages, all silk and silver, designed to remind prisoners they were beneath even the luxury they were forced to inhabit. Sarah ignored the opulence and went straight to the window. 3 stories up, facing the eastern courtyard where the Alpha King's guard trained in precise, joyless formations. Everything in his domain moved like clockwork. Cold, efficient, empty. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. 72 hours to solve a murder she didn't commit while trapped in a castle full of people who wanted her dead. The odds weren't exactly in her favor. A knock at the door made her spin around. "Enter," she called, though it wasn't like she had a choice. The woman who stepped through was striking, late 30s, silver threading through her dark hair, wearing the formal robes of a palace healer. Her eyes held something Sarah hadn't expected: doubt. "My name is Dr. Maven Cross," the woman said, closing the door behind her. "I examined the prince's body." Sarah's pulse quickened. "You're the one who found the wolfsbane." "I found wolfsbane, yes." Maven moved closer, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "But I also found something else. Something I couldn't include in my official report without signing my own death warrant." "What are you talking about?" Maven pulled a small vial from her pocket, dark liquid that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Shadow root. Extremely rare. Extremely illegal. It mimics wolfsbane poisoning but works 3 times faster. I found traces of it in the prince's blood, mixed with the wolfsbane." Sarah's mind raced. Someone used both? Why? To ensure death, regardless of treatment. Wolfsbane can be purged if caught early enough. Shadow root can't. Maven's jaw tightened. Whoever did this wanted that child dead with absolute certainty, and they wanted someone, you, to take the blame. "Why tell me this?" "You could lose everything. Because I've served this palace for 15 years and I've watched it rot from the inside." Maven's eyes blazed with suppressed fury. The Alpha King might be stone, but his brother, Roland, is poison. And since his son's death, he's been whispering in the king's ear about Omega rebellions, about threats from within. This execution isn't about justice, it's about control. The pieces began clicking together in Sarah's mind. Roland wants to turn the king against Omegas completely. Or he wants to remove someone who might challenge his influence. Maven glanced at the door nervously. "There's more. The king has a condition. A curse, some say, though the healers call it emotional severance syndrome. 20 years ago, something happened. Something that broke him so completely that his wolf shut down every emotion to survive the pain. He feels nothing, fears nothing, loves nothing." "I noticed," Sarah said dryly, rubbing her jaw where his grip had been. "What you might not have noticed is that in 20 years he's never personally overseen a prisoner's investigation, never taken interest in anything beyond his duties." Maven's gaze turned sharp. "Until you, he could have executed you immediately. Instead, he gave you time. He wants to watch you." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "That's not encouraging." "Maybe not. But it's interesting." Maven moved toward the door, then paused. "There's someone in the palace who knows about Roland's dealings." A guard named Felix Torres. He served the prince's household. Find him if you can. And Sarah? Don't trust anyone, especially not the king. She slipped out, leaving Sarah alone with information that was either her salvation or a trap. Sarah spent the next hour pacing, planning. If Roland was behind this, she needed proof. The kind of proof that would convince a king who felt nothing to see the truth. But how did you reach someone who'd built walls so high around their heart that... The door crashed open without warning. Dominic filled the doorway, still in his training leathers, a sheen of sweat making his dark skin glow in the lamplight. His eyes found her immediately, and for a heartbeat, something almost like confusion crossed his face. "You're crying," he said flatly. Sarah touched her cheek, surprised to find it wet. She hadn't even realized. The weight of everything, the accusations, the impossible task, the child who died, had finally broken through her control. "Does it matter?" she asked, quickly wiping her face. He stepped into the room, and she noticed he was limping slightly. A training injury, probably. Even stone kings could bleed. "I've come to inform you that my brother requests your immediate execution," Dominic said, his tone as casual as if discussing the weather. "He believes 3 days is too generous." "Of course he does," Sarah muttered. "I denied his request." She looked up sharply. "Why?" For the first time, Dominic seemed uncertain how to answer. His brow furrowed, a minute crack in his frozen facade. "I don't know," he admitted, the words clearly uncomfortable in his mouth. "You interest me. That hasn't happened in a very long time. I'm so flattered to be your entertainment." "That's not—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "You're not afraid of me." "Should I be? Everyone else is." Sarah crossed her arms, emboldened by desperation. "Fear won't save me, so I might as well be honest." Something shifted in his expression, so subtle she might have imagined it. He moved closer, and she caught his scent, cedar and snow and something wild underneath. His wolf, perhaps, buried beneath all that ice. "Why would someone frame you specifically?" he asked. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." "Then figure it faster." But his voice had lost some of its edge. "I may be stone, Omega, but I'm not unjust. If you're innocent, I'll find who's guilty." "And if you don't find them in time?" His eyes met hers, and in their depths she saw the terrible truth. He would kill her without hesitation, without remorse, without feeling a single thing. But maybe, just maybe, some part of him didn't want to. "Then you'll die," he said simply, "and I'll continue as I always have, alone, unbroken, unfailing." As he turned to leave, Sarah's voice stopped him. "That's not strength, Alpha King. That's just surviving. There's a difference." He paused in the doorway, his broad back rigid. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Surviving is all I know how to do anymore." Then he was gone, leaving Sarah with the echo of words that sounded less like a threat and more like a confession. The mystery deepens as allies emerge from shadows. But can Sarah trust anyone in a palace built on lies? Chapter 3 awaits. Hit subscribe to continue the journey. The hunt begins. Sarah barely slept. Every creak of the palace made her jump, expecting assassins or worse. Another attempt to frame her before she could clear her name. But dawn came without incident, bringing with it a silent servant who delivered breakfast and a folded note tucked beneath the plate. Garden gate, 1 hour. Come alone. F. Felix. It had to be. Sarah dressed quickly in the simple clothes they'd provided, grey tunic and pants that marked her as beneath notice. Perfect for moving through a palace where servants were invisible. She waited until the guards changed shifts, timing the 30-second gap when neither could see her door, then slipped into the corridor. The palace was a labyrinth designed to remind visitors of their insignificance. Sarah had studied the layout from her window, memorizing the paths to the eastern gardens. She moved with purpose, not running, which would draw attention, but walking like she had every right to be there. She passed maids who didn't look up, guards who didn't care, and once, a man in fine clothes who could only be Roland Blackthorne. The king's brother had their father's features, but none of Dominic's severe beauty. He looked soft, comfortable, dangerous in the way of men who smiled while they destroyed you. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Roland's lips curved into something that might have been a smile or a threat. Then he was past, leaving Sarah with ice in her veins and the certainty that Maven was right. This man was poison. The garden gate stood hidden behind a curtain of winter jasmine. Sarah found Felix waiting in the shadows, a young guard with haunted eyes and the rigid posture of someone who'd seen too much. "You came," he breathed, relief evident. "I wasn't sure you'd risk it." "I don't have the luxury of playing it safe." Sarah glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "Maven said you know something about Roland's dealings." Felix's jaw tightened. "I know he's been stealing from the royal treasury for 3 years. Small amounts, untraceable, building a war chest. For what? A coup, maybe, or leverage. Roland's always been ambitious. But since his son died..." Felix's voice cracked slightly. "Prince Marcus was a good kid. Bright, kind, everything Roland wasn't, and Roland hated him for it." Sarah's blood ran cold. "You think Roland killed his own son?" "I think Roland would do anything to secure power." Felix pulled a leather journal from his jacket. "This belonged to Marcus. He gave it to me the day before he died, said he found something important, something about his father that scared him." Sarah took the journal with trembling hands. The pages were filled with a child's neat handwriting, observations about palace life, drawings of wolves and stars. But near the end, the tone changed. Father met with the man with the snake tattoo again. They argued about the Omega problem and removing obstacles. I don't understand what they mean, but Father looked at me strange after, like he was doing math in his head. I heard Father tell the man, "When the king falls, I'll need someone people fear. Someone who can't be bought or broken." The man laughed and said, "And you think that's you?" Father didn't answer. "I'm scared." Father asked me who I'd be loyal to if something happened to Uncle Dominic. I said I'd be loyal to our pack. He didn't like that answer. The final entry was dated the day Marcus died. I found Father's ledgers. So much money missing. If Uncle Dominic knew. Father caught me. He smiled. He never smiles. I'm going to tell Miss Sarah. She'll know what to do. Sarah looked up, her throat tight. He was coming to me for help. And Roland couldn't allow that. Felix's hands balled into fists. So he killed Marcus and framed you in one move, eliminated a threat and created a scapegoat to push his anti-Omega agenda. "The snake tattoo," Sarah said urgently. "Who is that?" "I don't know, but there's a smuggler's den in the lower city, the Serpent's Den. If anyone has answers about illegal dealings, it's there. Sarah's mind raced. I need to get out of the palace. Impossible. The king ordered you confined. If you're caught outside these walls, then I'll be executed for escaping instead of for murder. Either way, I'm dead unless I find proof. Sarah met Felix's eyes. Help me. Please. Felix warred with himself, duty versus conscience playing out across his face. Finally, he nodded. There's a service tunnel that leads to the lower city. Used it myself when I was sneaking out as a cadet. But Sarah, if the king finds out I helped you, then we'd better make sure this works. They were halfway to the tunnel entrance when a voice froze them both. Going somewhere, Omega? Dominic stepped from the shadows like nightmare made flesh. He wore full armor today, ceremonial but no less deadly, the black metal making him look like death's own emissary. His eyes moved from Sarah to Felix, cold calculation evident. Your Majesty, Felix stammered, dropping to one knee. I was just conspiring to help a prisoner escape. Yes, I can see that. Dominic moved closer, each step deliberate. I'm disappointed, Felix. Your father served mine faithfully. Please, Sarah interjected, moving between them. This isn't his fault. I manipulated him. Don't. Dominic's gaze pinned her in place. I've ruled for 20 years. I know manipulation when I see it. This was his choice. He gestured, and 2 guards materialized from nowhere, seizing Felix's arms. Take him to the cells. I'll decide his punishment after I've dealt with this one. No. Sarah lunged forward, but Dominic caught her wrist with impossible speed. His grip was iron, his expression unchanged as Felix was dragged away. You've just cost a good man his career, Dominic said softly. Perhaps his life. Was your escape worth that? Sarah wanted to scream, to rage, to make this Stone King feel something. Instead, she held up the journal with her free hand. Your nephew wrote this. Read it. Why would I? Because he was trying to expose your brother before he died. Because Roland is stealing from you. Because that child came to me for help, and your brother killed him to keep his secret safe. The words tumbled out desperately. I'm not running. I'm hunting. There's a difference. Dominic stared at the journal like it might bite him. Slowly, he released her wrist and took it, flipping through pages with methodical precision. Sarah watched his face for any reaction. Anger, grief, anything. But his expression remained locked in neutral. When he finished, he closed the journal carefully. This proves nothing. It proves your nephew was afraid of his own father. It proves he was a child with an active imagination. But something in Dominic's voice had shifted. Doubt, maybe, or the faintest echo of pain. My brother may be ambitious, but killing his own son is exactly what a man like Roland would do if that son became inconvenient. Sarah stepped closer, reckless with urgency. Your Majesty, please, give me 12 hours. Let me find the man with the snake tattoo. If I'm wrong, I'll return and accept execution without protest. But if I'm right, if you're right, my brother committed treason and murder. Dominic's eyes finally met hers, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, she saw something alive in their depths, something that looked like grief trying to break through stone. And I've been blind to it for 3 years. Stone can't see, Sarah said quietly. It can only stand and weather and break. But you're not stone, Alpha King. no matter how hard you've tried to become it. His jaw clenched. The guards waited in tense silence. Sarah held her breath, aware she'd just gambled everything on the impossible hope that somewhere beneath the ice a man still existed. Finally, Dominic spoke. "You have until sunset." Not a moment longer. Sarah's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me." He turned away, shoulders rigid beneath his armor. "If you're not back by dark, I'll hunt you myself." "And Omega? When I hunt, I never miss." He strode away, leaving Sarah with 12 hours to prove the impossible, and a strange, dangerous flutter in her chest that felt almost like hope. The race against time intensifies as Sarah ventures into the city's darkest corners. What secrets await in the Serpent's Den? Subscribe for Chapter 4. The truth is about to bite back. Venom and truth. The lower city smelled of smoke, desperation, and wolves living too close together with too little hope. Sarah moved through the narrow streets with her hood pulled low, following Felix's hastily sketched map toward the Serpent's Den. The smuggler's tavern squatted in a blind alley where even the city guard didn't venture, a calculated distance from law and consequence. Its weathered sign bore a snake coiled around a wineglass, paint flaking like shed skin. Sarah pushed through the door into a wall of noise and suspicion. Conversations died as heads turned, assessing the Omega who'd been foolish or desperate enough to enter. At a corner table, a man with silver eyes and ink-dark skin gestured her forward with one finger. The snake tattoo wound around his forearm like a living thing. "You must be the dead girl walking," he said, voice smooth as poison. "I'm Ash. Heard you've been asking about me." Sarah sat across from him, hyper-aware of the knives at his belt. "Roland Blackthorn hired you for something. I need to know what." Ash's laugh was low and dangerous. "Do you know what happens to people who share my client's business?" They stop being people. "Your client killed a 7-year-old boy and framed me for it." Sarah leaned forward, letting him see her desperation. "I have until sunset. After that, the Alpha King himself will execute me. So unless you're planning to kill me in the next..." She glanced at the tavern's clock. 9 hours. I've got nothing to lose." Something like respect flickered across Ash's face. "Bold. Stupid. But bold." He studied her for a long moment. "Roland hired me to acquire Shadowroot and plant it in your quarters. Said you were a threat to Pack security. Paid triple my usual rate." "Why me specifically?" "Didn't ask." "Don't care." Ash poured himself a drink from a bottle that looked expensive and illegal. "But I'll tell you something interesting. Roland wasn't working alone. Had a partner, someone in the palace guard who provided your schedule, the kitchen access times, everything needed to make the frame stick." Sarah's blood chilled. "Who?" "Don't know names, but I can tell you where they meet." Ash slid a piece of paper across the table. "Old mill outside the city walls. Midnight exchanges, usually. Next one's tonight. That's after my deadline. Then I guess you'll have to convince the Alpha King to give you an extension." Ash's smile was all teeth. "Or you could run. I know routes out of the kingdom that even Blackthorn's hunters couldn't track." The offer hung between them, tempting. Sarah could disappear, start over, live. But Felix would pay for helping her. Maven would be questioned, and Roland would be free to continue his treason, removing anyone who stood between him and the throne. No, Sarah said. "I'm not running." "Pity." "You're more interesting than most Omegas I meet." Ash stood, tossing coins on the table. "Word of advice?" "When you expose Roland, make sure the king believes you, because if Dominic thinks you're lying, death will be the kindest thing he does to you." Sarah left the serpent's den with proof of conspiracy, but still lacking the final piece, the identity of Roland's inside contact. She had 6 hours to find them, or convince the Alpha King to extend her deadline. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when she finally made it back to the palace, slipping through the service tunnel just as Felix had directed. She emerged in the storage cellars, immediately aware something was wrong. Too quiet. The usual bustle of servants was absent. Then she heard voices, Roland's smooth tones and another she didn't recognize. "Can't keep her alive much longer. My brother's actually developing something resembling curiosity. It's revolting." "Then we accelerate the timeline," the second voice said. Captain of the Guard Marcus Steele. Sarah realized with sinking dread. Felix's direct superior. Frame her for another crime. Make it so obvious even Dominic's stone heart can't deny it. What did you have in mind? An attempt on the king's life. Tonight, during the memorial ceremony for my nephew. Roland's voice dripped false grief. We stage it to look like she escaped, attacked him, got caught in the act. Simple, clean. By sunrise, she's dead, and Dominic is finally convinced that Omegas are the threat I've been warning him about. Sarah's mind raced. The memorial ceremony. She'd forgotten. Tonight, the entire court would gather to honor Prince Marcus. Maximum visibility, maximum impact. She had to warn Dominic. Sarah ran through the corridors, no longer caring about stealth. She burst into the throne room where the Alpha King stood alone, staring at his nephew's portrait with an expression that might have been grief on someone capable of feeling it. "Your Majesty," she gasped. Dominic turned, and something dangerous flashed across his face. "You're 3 hours early." Should I be impressed by your punctuality, or concerned about what forced you back? Roland's planning to kill you tonight. During the ceremony, they're going to frame me for the attempt. The words hung in the air like drawn steel. Dominic moved toward her with predatory grace, stopping close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the precise line of his mouth, the absolute emptiness in his eyes. "Explain. Everything. Now." Sarah did, words tumbling out in a rush. Ash, the Shadow Root, Captain Steele's involvement, the overheard conversation. Dominic listened without interruption, his face an emotionless mask that made her want to scream. When she finished, he was silent for so long she wondered if he'd heard her at all. "You're asking me to believe my brother, my blood, killed his own son to frame you as part of a plot to overthrow me," Dominic said finally, "based on a smuggler's testimony, a child's journal, and an overheard conversation." "Yes." "And you expect me to act on this during a memorial ceremony attended by every major pack in the territory?" "I expect you to not die tonight, actually." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent, almost alive. "You're either the bravest Omega I've ever met or the most foolish." He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "If you're lying, if this is an elaborate escape attempt, I will make your death legendary in its suffering." "I'm not lying." "No," he said quietly. I don't believe you are. He turned back to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, something like emotion flickered in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or betrayal, or the horrible realization that the stone he'd built around his heart had begun to crack. My brother and I were close once, before I became this. He was the only one who didn't fear me. I thought that meant loyalty. Sometimes the people who don't fear us are the ones who hurt us most, Sarah said softly. Dominic's gaze sharpened on her face, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. You should hate me. I threatened to kill you, gave you an impossible task, showed you no mercy. Hate requires energy I don't have. Sarah stepped closer, reckless with exhaustion and relief, and something else she didn't want to name. Besides, you gave me 3 days when you could have killed me immediately. You denied your brother's request for my execution. You're letting me prove my innocence. That's more mercy than you think. It's not mercy, Dominic said, his voice dropping to something almost raw. It's selfishness. For 20 years I've felt nothing. No joy, no pain, no hope, no fear. Just emptiness. And then you stood in my throne room and looked at me like I was still a man instead of a monster. And for one moment, one brief, impossible moment, I felt something. His jaw clenched. I wanted to understand what you'd awakened. That's why I gave you time. Not mercy. Curiosity. Sarah's breath caught. And what did I awaken? He looked at her like the answer terrified him more than any enemy. I don't know yet. But tonight, we're going to find out. The trap is set, but who's hunting whom? The memorial ceremony will reveal truths that could shatter a kingdom or save it. Chapter 5 is coming. Subscribe to see how this dangerous dance ends. When Stone Bleeds. The memorial ceremony transformed the palace's grand hall into a cathedral of grief and gold. Candles burned in concentric circles around Prince Marcus's portrait, a beautiful boy with his father's weak chin and his uncle's penetrating eyes, smiling in a way that suggested he'd known what joy meant. Sarah watched from the shadows behind a pillar, dressed in servant's black, a borrowed dagger hidden in her sleeve. Dominic had insisted she attend despite the danger, claiming he needed her eyes. You know what betrayal looks like, he'd said. I've been blind to it for too long. Now the Alpha King stood at the ceremony's center, magnificent in ceremonial armor, speaking words of loss with a voice that held no feeling. The court watched with various degrees of sympathy and calculation. Roland stood closest to his brother, the picture of grieving fatherhood, dabbing at dry eyes. Sarah wanted to vomit. Beautiful ceremony, a voice murmured beside her. Captain Steele had materialized like smoke, his hand resting casually on his sword. Pity you won't live to see the end of it. Going to kill me here? In front of everyone? Not me. You. His smile was knife-thin. See, in about 2 minutes, one of my men, dressed as you, will attempt to stab the king. We'll stop the assassin, but not before His Majesty is wounded. Tragically, the assassin will die in custody before revealing who hired them. And you? He leaned closer. You'll be found hiding with this. He pressed something into her palm, a vial of shadow root identical to the one Maven had shown her. They'll think you were preparing a second attempt, Steele continued. By sunrise, you'll be executed and the king will finally understand that Omegas can't be trusted. Roland becomes regent. I become his right hand. Everyone wins. Except the truth. The truth is whatever those in power say it is. Steele's eyes went cold. Nothing personal, Omega. You're just in the way. He moved off into the crowd, and Sarah's mind raced. She had to warn Dominic, but moving from her position would draw attention. She looked wildly around the hall, searching for anything that could... There. A servant carrying a tray of wine glasses, heading toward the king. Sarah stepped into her path deliberately, causing a collision that sent glasses crashing to the marble floor. The sound cut through the ceremony like a scream. Every head turned, including Dominic's. His eyes found hers across the hall, and in that moment of connection, she mouthed 2 words. Behind you. Dominic moved with supernatural speed, spinning just as a hooded figure lunged from the crowd with a dagger aimed at his spine. The blade meant to kill a king instead sliced across his forearm as he blocked. Blood bloomed against silver armor. The hall erupted into chaos. Guards swarmed the assassin, but not before Dominic ripped the hood back, revealing not a stranger, but a young palace servant. Compelled, Sarah realized with horror. The girl's eyes were dilated, her movements jerky, drugged, controlled. "Seize her!" Roland's voice carried over the chaos, his finger pointed directly at Sarah. "The Omega! She's the one controlling the girl." "I'm not." "She has Shadow Root." Steele held up a vial identical to the one he'd forced into Sarah's pocket. "Found it on her person." The guards moved toward Sarah, and she realized with sinking certainty that the frame was perfect. Too perfect. Even if she protested, even if she claimed Steele had planted it, who would believe an Omega over the captain of the guard? But then Dominic's voice cut through the hall like a blade. "Enough." The single word carried such authority that even Roland froze. The Alpha King stood with blood running down his arm, his eyes blazing with something that was definitely not emptiness anymore. "Captain Steele," Dominic said with deadly calm, "show me your hands." "Your Majesty, I don't understand." "Your hands." Steele complied, confusion evident. His palms were clean, unremarkable. But Dominic moved closer, grabbed the captain's wrist, and held it to the light. "This mark," Dominic said, pressing his thumb against a small stain on Steele's palm. "Shadow Root leaves a distinctive residue. Takes hours to fade. The Omega has been in my sight for the past 3 hours. You, however, were in the armory. Alone." His voice dropped to something terrifying. "You planted evidence on her." "Just now. I watched you." The blood drained from Steele's face. "And you, brother." Dominic turned to Roland, still holding Steele's wrist. "You've been poisoning my court against Omegas for years. Creating division, building fear. I thought you were protecting the pack. But you weren't, were you? You were preparing for this moment." "Dominic, you're injured, not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in 20 years. Dominic released Steele, who immediately lunged for his sword. He never reached it. Dominic moved like lightning given form, disarming and disabling the captain in 3 brutal motions. Steele hit the marble hard, gasping as the king's boot pressed against his throat. "Tell them," Dominic commanded. "Tell them everything, and I'll make your death quick." "Roland promised me power," Steele choked out. Said when he took the throne, I'd command the entire military. All I had to do was help remove obstacles. The boy was an obstacle. The Omega was an obstacle. You were—" He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "You were supposed to die tonight. Clean succession. Everyone would think Omegas were rising up. Perfect excuse for the purge Roland's been planning." The hall had gone silent. Every eye turned to Roland, who stood pale and shaking. "Brother," he tried one last time. "You can't believe— I believe my nephew died because of you." Dominic's voice cracked, the first real emotion Sarah had heard from him. "I believe you killed your own son because he discovered your treason. I believe you've been working to destroy me for years while I stood blind and stone and useless." He looked at Sarah then, and she saw the truth written in his eyes. The stone was breaking, the ice was melting, and underneath there was grief, raw and terrible and human. "Guards," Dominic said quietly, "take my brother to the cells. Captain Steele as well. They'll be tried for treason and murder at dawn." As Roland was dragged away, screaming protests, Dominic swayed. The blood loss was catching up to him. Sarah moved without thinking, crossing the hall to catch him before he fell. "You're hurt," she said urgently. "I've been hurt for 20 years. His hand came up to touch her face with unexpected gentleness. "But tonight, someone reminded me what it feels like to be alive." His eyes closed, and he collapsed against her. Maven appeared from the crowd, calling for healers, but Sarah barely heard her. She held the Alpha King, this impossible man who'd been stone until her tears and truth had somehow reached him, and whispered words he probably couldn't hear. "Don't you dare die now. Not when you've finally started living." Above them, the candles flickered, and Prince Marcus's portrait seemed to smile with something like approval. The conspiracy is exposed. But at what cost? As dawn approaches, a king must face his demons, and an Omega must decide if a heart of stone deserves a second chance. The final chapter awaits. Subscribe to see how their story ends. When stone becomes flesh. Dawn broke over the northern territories in shades of gold and crimson, painting the palace walls with the colors of endings and beginnings. Sarah sat beside Dominic's bed in the healing wing, watching his chest rise and fall with steady rhythm. Maven had worked through the night, cleaning and closing the wound, assuring Sarah that the Alpha King would survive. The physical injury, at least. The emotional one was harder to measure. "You should rest," Maven said, touching Sarah's shoulder. "He'll sleep for hours yet." "I'll rest when I know he's okay." "He's not been okay for 20 years, child. You can't fix that in a night." But maybe she'd started something. Because when Dominic had collapsed in her arms, when his carefully constructed walls had finally shattered, she'd seen the man beneath the monster. Brilliant, damaged, and desperately lonely. A man who'd chosen stone because flesh had hurt too much. "Tell me what happened to him," Sarah said quietly. 20 years ago. What broke him?" Maven was silent for a long moment. "That's his story to tell. But I'll say this. He loved someone once, completely. The way alphas love when they find their true match. And he lost her in a way that nearly destroyed him. His wolf chose numbness over madness, survival over living. And now? Now the numbness is cracking. Which means the grief is coming back. All of it. 20 years of suppressed pain." Maven's expression was troubled. "Be careful, Sarah. When stone breaks, it doesn't always break clean." The healer left, and Sarah was alone with her thoughts and the sleeping king. She studied his face, the harsh beauty softened by unconsciousness, the faint lines that spoke of burdens carried too long alone. Her hand found his without conscious thought, their fingers intertwining. "I don't know what you're supposed to do next," she whispered. "How you're supposed to rule a kingdom when you're finally letting yourself feel again. But you don't have to do it alone. Not anymore." His hand tightened on hers, just a fraction, but enough. When Dominic's eyes finally opened hours later, the first thing he saw was Sarah's face, and something that might have been relief crossed his features. "You stayed," he said, his voice rough from sleep and healing. "Where else would I go? You still haven't officially pardoned me." A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh, rusty, unpracticed, beautiful. "Consider yourself pardoned, vindicated, honored, even. The Omega who saved the king's life and exposed a conspiracy deserves more than my thanks." He tried to sit up, winced, settled for propping himself on one elbow. "Roland and Steele face execution at noon. The court expects me to preside. Can you?" "I'm the Alpha King." "I can do anything." But his voice held doubt instead of conviction. "Or, I thought I could. Now I'm not sure what I am anymore." Sarah shifted closer, still holding his hand. "You're a man who survived something that should have killed him. That's not weakness. That's incredible strength." "Is it?" His eyes met hers, no longer empty, but filled with something raw and uncertain. "For 20 years, I've ruled with perfect logic. No emotion to cloud my judgment. No attachments to compromise my decisions. I was effective, fair, incorruptible." His jaw tightened. "And completely blind to my own brother's treason, to the suffering in my court, to the fact that I'd become exactly what I feared, a monster who couldn't tell the difference between justice and cruelty." "You gave me 3 days when you could have killed me immediately," Sarah reminded him. "That wasn't cruelty. That was hope, even if you didn't recognize it. I didn't give you 3 days out of hope. I gave you 3 days because something about you made me curious, because for the first time in 2 decades, I wanted to understand something beyond duty." "And what did you discover?" Dominic's hand came up to cup her face with unexpected tenderness. "That stone is easier than flesh. That emptiness is safer than feeling. But that safe isn't the same as alive." His thumb brushed her cheek. "You cried the first night. I couldn't understand why tears mattered. Now I think I'm beginning to remember." "Don't!" Sarah said urgently. "Don't apologize for surviving the only way you knew how." "I'm not apologizing. I'm thanking you." His eyes held hers with intensity that stole her breath. "For seeing a man when everyone else saw a monster. For refusing to break when I gave you every reason to. For reminding me that hearts can thaw, even when you've convinced yourself they're permanently frozen." The space between them felt charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. Sarah was intensely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his hand against her face, the way his gaze dropped to her lips before returning to her eyes. "Your Majesty." "Dominic," he corrected. "When we're alone, call me Dominic." "Dominic," she tried, the name feeling intimate in a way titles never could. "I'm still an Omega. You're still the Alpha King. Whatever this is between us is complicated, unprecedented, possibly unwise. His smile was small but genuine. "But I've been wise for 20 years, and it made me a statue. Maybe it's time to be foolish." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but Sarah found she didn't want to. When his lips met hers, it was gentle, a question more than a claim. She answered by kissing him back, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat, strong and real and alive. When they parted, Dominic's eyes held wonder and terror in equal measure. "I can feel it," he whispered, "the ice cracking. Everything I've suppressed for so long trying to break free. Sarah, I don't know if I can control it. If I can be what a king needs to be while learning to feel again." "Then don't be what a king needs to be," Sarah said firmly. "Be what a man needs to be. Human, flawed, real. The kingdom doesn't need another stone king. It needs a leader who remembers what it's like to hurt and hope and heal. And if I fail, then you fail. But you'll fail as yourself, not as the monument you built to survive trauma." She squeezed his hand. "Besides, you won't be alone. You have Maven, Felix, me, people who see you. Not the legend or the monster or the Stone King, but you." Dominic stared at her like she'd offered him something precious and terrifying. "You're extraordinary," he said finally, "and I'm a fool who almost killed you because I'd forgotten how to trust my instincts. Your instincts gave me 3 days. That was enough. 3 days to save my life and my kingdom. You work fast." This time, Sarah's laugh came easily. "I was motivated." Death is a powerful deadline. The joke broke something in him, the last of his careful control. He laughed then, really laughed, and the sound was rusty but genuine. When he sobered, there were tears tracking down his face, the first he'd shed in 20 years. "I grieved for my nephew," he said quietly. "When Roland was dragged away, when I finally let myself believe what he'd done, I felt grief. Not numbness, not logic, just pain. And it was terrible and cleansing and human." Sarah wiped his tears away with gentle fingers. "That's what being alive costs. The pain and the joy together. You can't have one without the other." "Then I choose both." Dominic pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. "I choose feeling and failing, and trying to be better. I choose you, if you'll have me, knowing I'm broken and healing and not at all what an Omega deserves." "You're exactly what this Omega needs," Sarah whispered. "Someone who understands that strength isn't the absence of vulnerability. It's choosing to be vulnerable anyway." They stayed like that as the sun climbed higher, 2 broken people finding wholeness in each other's arms. Outside, the kingdom waited for justice. Roland and Steele would face execution. The court would demand explanations. Life would continue with all its complications and challenges. But in this moment, none of that mattered. In this moment, the Alpha King's heart, which had been stone for 20 years, beat with genuine warmth. And an Omega who'd faced death with courage held him while he remembered what it meant to be human. Later, when Dominic stood before the court to pass judgment on his brother, Sarah watched from her place of honor beside Maven. The Alpha King's voice held emotion now, controlled but present. Grief for his nephew, anger at betrayal, but also mercy where mercy was earned. He spared Felix completely, promoting him for his loyalty. He granted Maven authority to reform the healing wing. And when his eyes found Sarah's across the hall, they held promise of time, of healing, of learning to build something real from the ruins of stone. The old Alpha King had been perfect, untouchable, and utterly alone. The new one was flawed, vulnerable, and learning that imperfection shared was better than perfection isolated. As the ceremony ended and the court dispersed, Dominic made his way to Sarah, offering his hand. "Walk with me?" he asked. "Where?" "Anywhere. Everywhere. I've spent 20 years standing still. It's time to remember how to move forward." Sarah took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers, and together they walked into the afternoon sun. Behind them, the palace stood as it always had, ancient, imposing, eternal. But inside its walls, something fundamental had shifted. The Stone King had learned to bleed, and in bleeding, he'd finally learned to live.